Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group today. The title of my talk is North Slope Renaissance. The reason I call it a renaissance is not only because ConocoPhillips has a lot of projects that we're pursuing, but there's a tremendous amount of work now being pursued by other companies on the North Slope. Probably one company doesn't make a renaissance, but when you take a look at all the activity on the North Slope and compare it to what's been going on over the recent time frame, it truly is a change in activity and level of investment in Alaska's North Slope. Now, of course, what's important about this is that it's going to generate more revenue for the state, widespread economic activity, and jobs for Alaskans. So I'm going to go through this afternoon and talk about what ConocoPhillips is doing, and at the end I'm going to pull together all the activity on the North Slope and show you what's going on up there. Okay, well, I work for a publicly traded corporation, and our SEC lawyers always tell us we have to show you this cautionary statement, safe harbor statement. Now, I don't expect you to read it, but there's a section in here that probably is pertinent to what I'm going to say today. And what it says is I'm going to be making forward-looking statements. They're going to be based upon certain assumptions, which I believe to be true today, but those assumptions might change, and if they change, I'm under no obligation to come back and talk to you about it. So. This is a map of the North Slope, and it shows most of the federal and state units up there. The blue, the yellow, and the reddish units are units where ConocoPhillips has a working interest. Recently, we have increased our working interest in a couple of these units. The APICC River unit, we recently announced that we signed an agreement with BP to acquire their interest, and when that deal closes, we'll be about a 95% working interest in the APICC unit. Then if you move further west to those reddish units, that's what we call the Western North Slope, and that black and white dashed line is the boundary of the National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska. So the unit that's called the Colville River unit, that's where the Alpine field is located. And you can see part of Alpine and then all those other units are located in the NPRA. Earlier this year, we announced that we had acquired Anadarko's interest in the Western North Slope. And that deal closed early, and since then our working interest is gone from 78% to essentially 100% in the Western North Slope. Now, what motivated us to make those acquisitions? Well, we had some differences in investment philosophy with our partners in those fields, and it made sense for them to sell their interest for us and for us to basically take a larger working interest up there. So what I want to share with you now is just a summary of the projects that we have going on, and I'll talk a little bit more detail about some of them. First, though, I want to take you back to the year 2013. If you go back in time, and I'd been able to bring you inside our boardroom and show you what our forecast was for Alaska production, this is what it would have looked like. It's not a particularly exciting graph, it just goes down. We were riding the decline curve of the big fields here in Alaska. What was going on then? Well, we had a very disadvantageous tax system up here. We had the ACES tax system. We had marginal tax rates as high as 90%. Those kind of tax rates don't incentivize investment. We had a high cost of supply in Alaska, and as a company, we had a multitude of opportunities in the unconventional plays in Texas and North Dakota. So the bulk of our domestic North American investment was going down into those fields. So Alaska was basically on a decline. We didn't see a really bright future up here. But now if you fast forward to 2018, this is what our production forecast looks like now. It's those red bars. That gray bar down there, that's what it looked like in 2013. The red bars is what it looks like now. And this is before the acquisitions that I talked about. When you include the acquisition of BP's interest and Anadarko's interest, it looks like this. So a pretty significant change. So what brought that about? Well, a couple things. In 2013, the legislature passed tax reform, and in 2014, we had a popular vote on that, and voters approved it, they ratified it. So it brought, from a tax point of view, it put Alaska back in a place where it's competitive with other places where we do business. We've had some technological advancements, particularly in the area of drilling, and I'll share with you in a moment how drilling has really reshaped the economies and the economics of development on the North Slope. And of course, we had a big price downturn over the last few years. Fortunately, prices are coming back up. But what happened during that price crunch, and that really was kind of a crisis for our companies, we're in a commodity business and prices go up and down, is we took a really hard look at our business and tried to find ways to take cost out of what we're doing, not only in Alaska, but as a company as a whole. And this really happened throughout the industry. When your price goes from $120, $100 a barrel down to $30 a barrel, it tends to shake you up a little bit. So in that process, we brought our cost of supply here in Alaska down, so it's still competitive within our portfolio. So we got a little bit more excited about Alaska. We spent some money on exploration over the last few years, and we've had some pretty significant results. And I'll talk about that in a moment as well. So those are the things that have changed the outlook. And as you can see, as you get up towards the upper end of 300,000 barrels a day, it kind of grays out a little bit, and that's because we're not really sure what that upside looks like. We have more exploration potential in Alaska, and we have a lot more work to do. So let me talk about drilling. Drilling really has been transformative, the changes and the improvements in drilling technology in terms of what we can develop on the North Slope. This graph kind of illustrates what's happened over time in terms of what we can do with extended reach drilling. In other words, how far out we can go from a central drill site. So if you go back to the late 1970s when we were starting the development of Prudhoe Bay, a drill site was 65 acres. Well spacing from well to well was in the order of 120 feet. We could drill maybe 3 to 4 square miles from an individual drill site. When I came up here in '82, I thought that was pretty good. You know, one drill site, 4 square miles. Well, by 2016, we shrunk the drill sites to about 12 acres, same number of wells, maybe more, and we were able to reach in the range of 22,000 plus feet from a single drill site. That allowed us to develop, I got to look at the slide here, about 55 square miles from a single drill site. Earlier this year, we announced that we had drilled the longest land-based horizontal well in North American history. So using one of our existing drilling rigs, we drilled a horizontal well. So basically we come down in the well bore, vertical well bore, we cut a hole in the side of the well bore, then we take our drilling string and we go vertically, or horizontally rather, into the producing sandstone. We did this in the Alpine field in a well called CD 525, and we ended up with a well bore that was 21,000 feet, nearly 4 miles in the pay zone. Now, if you go back to the early days of Prudhoe Bay, that same well, this is a 15-foot thick sand, would have cut maybe 20 feet. So as you can tell, that's a tremendous difference in terms of how much of the well bore is open to the reservoir for production. And beyond that, we had another lateral in this well bore, so we drilled multilaterals these days, and that lateral above it was 10,000 feet in the pay zone. So we had about 30,000 feet of pay in a single well bore. So you're talking 6 miles of pay in a single well. Well, that has a big impact on our economics. The well rates are higher, the recovery rates are higher, we don't need as many well bores to develop the resource. And when you combine that with a smaller footprint of 12-acre drill sites, you eliminate gravel, you eliminate pipelines. You eliminate all the infrastructure that you need to bring that back to your central production facilities. So what that's done is it means that resources, which were 20 years ago, would not have been economic, they are economic today. This drilling technology really has been a game changer for us. So this is the summary of projects I referenced just a moment ago. We call it the pipeline of projects. And it really starts with CD5. CD5 was a project we brought on stream a few years ago, and it's on the western side of the Colville River unit. We announced just recently that we brought the Greater Moose's Tooth 1 or GMT1 project on stream. We brought that on stream October 5th. During the construction of that project, we had about 700 people over the last 2 construction seasons building this project. And that was a lot of union and non-union labor, but predominantly sourced from Alaskans. For the union labor, we went to the union halls in Fairbanks and they called up their members. And for the non-union folks, we sourced it out of shops that were based in either Fairbanks or Anchorage. So it's been had a big impact on jobs for Alaskans. It cost about $725 million to develop. We initially estimated about $1 billion, and through this downturn, we were able to take some costs out of the project. So it's been another impact in terms of trying to make projects more economic up here. We're now in the process of beginning work on what we call Greater Moose's Tooth 2. It's about 8 miles to the southwest of GMT1. GMT2 recently got a final supplemental impact statement finished by the BLM, and we got a record of decision for the BLM, permit to drill. We got our 4.4 permit from the Corps of Engineers. So these are some of the major permits that we need to get for any project that we do on the North Slope. Basically, we have to go through the NEPA process, and usually those things take years. It took us 3 years to go through the permitting process on GMT2. That's a little on the long side, On GMT1, it took us about 18 months. So, we'd like to see that process sped up a little bit. But regardless, we've got our key permits. We have approved the project, and this winter we will start laying gravel for GMT2. And much like GMT1, we'll be employing probably about 700 people over several construction seasons to get the drill site built. This can be a little bit bigger in terms of the reservoir, so we're anticipating about 35 to 40,000 barrels a day from GMT2. The other field that we have in the process right now is called Fjord West. We have an extended reach drilling rig that's under construction right now by Doyon Drilling. This will be the biggest land-based drilling rig in North America. When that's built, we can go out 37,000 feet or so. And the real impetus for that was the Fjord field, the Fjord West field. We've had these leases for a number of years, and we couldn't figure out a way to develop them. As you can see, they're on the coastline. It's a very environmentally sensitive area. When we looked at the cost of pipelines and drill sites and compounded that with the environmental issues, we didn't see a way to get it permitted or built. Well, with the extended reach drilling rig that I just mentioned, we can now drill that off of an existing drill site in the fjord, in the Alpine field, and develop that. So that's another example of how drilling technology is really transforming what we can develop on the North Slope. And then lastly, the Willow Project. We announced this in 2017. It's a very large prospect, large enough that we're going to build a new standalone facility. And I'll provide you some more detail about that in a few slides. What I want to do next is just talk about some of the exploration drilling we've done over the last year. This really has helped provide the impetus for some of the projects that I'm going to talk about and set the scene for the future. Last drilling season, we drilled 6 different wells. We had 3 rigs running. We got 7 penetrations. One of the wells that we drilled was a sidetrack. Some of our drilling was focused on the Willow prospect. That's over here on the west side of that pictorial there. And it helped us better define the aerial extent of the reservoir. We did some well tests, so I have some better idea of productivity. We also drilled some wells, one well south of the Alpine field called Stony Hill. And we also drilled a well called Putu, which is close to the village of Nuiqsut. Both those wells were successes. We also drilled another rank wildcat called West Willow 1. That was a success. So very aggressive season and a lot of success, which of course that leads us to be more optimistic about some of our other prospects. Well, let me tell you what we found. I'll quantify it a little bit. As a result of last year's drilling season, we increased our resource estimate for the Willow field. We had initially estimated about 300 million barrels of resource. After the drilling and the seismic that we've shot most recently, we now estimate somewhere between 400 to 750 million barrels of resource out there. The upper end of that comes from seismic imaging. We have some proprietary seismic technology that ConocoPhillips has developed over the last few years called compressed seismic imaging. And what's unique about this is that it gives us a better picture of the subsurface at about a quarter of the cost. So you can either shoot the same program for 25% of the original cost or the previous cost, or we can shoot 4 times as much seismic. That's been a game changer as well, and that's where that upside comes from. When we take a look at our seismic, we think that the field may actually be bigger than we've been able to delineate through drilling. One of the other elements of this slide here that I wanted to share with you is just what the Willow development might look like. So I mentioned it's going to be standalone. So you see the dot on there that's called WCF. That stands for Willow Central Facility. That'll be a central facility much like the Alpine field. Probably most of you haven't been up there to see what that looks like. But it'll basically, we'll bring all the oil and gas and water from the production into the central facility. We process it. We produce pipeline quality oil, put it in the Alpine pipeline, Copark pipeline, which then goes over to the Trans-Alaska pipeline system, then on ships to market. We'll have about 4 additional drill sites besides the Willow Central Facility drill site, so a total of 5 drill sites, probably around 200 wells when it's fully developed. We anticipate we'll spend about $2 to $3 billion in investment before we get first oil. So it's one of the things that makes Alaska unique. If you're drilling in places like Texas or Oklahoma, you don't have to spend $3 billion to get to first oil. You don't have to spend $1 billion. You don't have to spend $725 million. You can go out there and, for the cost of a well, $8 to $10 million, you can basically be on production. So as we take a look at some of the things that make Alaska different, that is one of the main things, is you have to have tremendous staying power and deep pockets. And fortunately, I work for a company that's large enough to do that, but it's also one of the things that puts Alaska at a disadvantage for investment, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. So at any rate, we'll be doing a sea lift for this. We haven't done a sea lift since we built the Alpine field in the 2000 timeframe. We'll be bringing water over from the Kaparick River field. We'll be landing the sea lift modules just north of this string of drill sites that I show you, building an ice road to bring it down and putting the different modules in place at those locations on the map. So we anticipate probably several thousand people will be involved in the construction of these facilities. In long term, we're going to have to man it. So this will be a new facility. We'll need to build an operations organization around that. So we anticipate probably several hundred permanent ConocoPhillips employees required to run this operation. At the bottom of this, I've summarized the resource find that we made for the Putu and Stony Hill wells. We estimate between the two of those another 100 to 350 million barrels of oil. When you sum that up, we estimate probably 500 million to around 1.1 billion of resource discovered over the last several years. Stony Hill and Putu are going to require some more work to understand the size of the field and better understand how we're going to produce it. But the Putu well is within the Colville River unit, so a logical development plan for that would be to bring it back to the Alpine facilities. Okay, well, there's more. We're not done yet. As I mentioned earlier, with all the technology that we've developed and the optimism we see from our exploration program, we have more work that we want to do. So for 2019, we have an exploration program that's about the same size, maybe a little bit more aggressive than what we had in 2018. This is a map that shows the various units that I just described at the beginning of this talk. And you can see these orange plays on there. This next year, we anticipate drilling 6 to 8 exploration wells, probably doing 8 to 9 well tests, using 2 rigs to accomplish that program. Several of our exploration wells, though, we're going to drill off of gravel, and we're going to drill them in the 4th quarter of this year. So if you look at the southwest corner of the Kaparick River unit, you see a prospect there called Cairn. We can drill that off of drill site 2S, so we're going to do that in this quarter. There's another location that we're going to drill for the Putu well. We're going to be able to drill that from drill site CD4 in the Alpine field, so we're going to try and drill that this 4th quarter as well. And then during the winter ice road season, between the construction for GMT2 and the exploration program, we're anticipating probably somewhere in the range of another 140 miles of ice roads. And we'll focus our winter drilling program on the Willow field, drill some producers, drill some injectors, try to get a better idea of producibility and a better idea of the full extent of the field. And that will give us the reservoir information that we need to come back and a little bit down the road, define our plans better, and hopefully make an investment decision. That investment decision hasn't been made yet. It's going to be dependent upon what our final costs and producibility estimates look like. But we're not done yet. There's still more. You see these blobs throughout this whole map here. These are, well, actually, that's a technical term in geology, blobs. And this is called a blob map. But those blobs are geophysical anomalies that we've mapped from prior seismic that we've shot. So each one of those blobs represent another potential Willow or Putu or Stony Hill. Only about 75% of our exploration inventory on the western North Slope has been tested. So hopefully we'll have some success in future years, and if we do, we could see substantial more investment up there based upon new discoveries that we hope to make. So there's a lot of upside out there. So that kind of summarizes where ConocoPhillips is. We've got a lot of work that we're currently planning. We plan on more exploration. We've been pretty good at our exploration program so far, so hopefully we'll have some more success. But if you take a look at what's going on across the entire North Slope, that's what caused me to go back and call this a North Slope Renaissance. So I'll just quickly flip through what ConocoPhillips is doing. We have the GMT1, Fjord West, GMT2, the exploration acreage and other things I talked about. But then if you take a look at the other blobs or the other things that just popped up, these are other projects that are either going through the permitting process, they might have finished the permitting process, and they're in the decision phase, or in some instances, potentially the construction phase of development. So if you go over to the far east, you have the Liberty Prospect, that's BP and Hillcorp. They just recently got their EIS approved by the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management. So they're going to be in a position where they can start deciding whether or not they want to proceed with that. That's a 60 to 70,000 barrel a day project, $1 billion plus. If you go a little bit to the west, you have E&I. E&I has been doing some exploration drilling, and they recently picked up a big block of Calix's exploration acreage south of Prudhoe Bay. So clearly Repsol has some interest in doing some, E&I has some interest in doing additional exploration up here. Then you have the red wedge up there. That's Calix's Nuna prospect. We think that prospect looks pretty good. Calix has said, potentially somewhere in the 20,000+ barrels a day of production and in excess of $1 billion to develop that. That orangish or purplish strip there, that's the APICCC prospect. That's the one that's being managed by Oil Search with their partners Repsol and Armstrong. They've talked about anywhere from 60 to 100,000 barrels a day of production from that particular field. It's kind of the newest trend on the North Slope. They're talking about standalone facilities. And if you just go by closeology, the scale of their standalone facilities looks a lot like what we're talking about for Willow. So if they go that route, that'll be another multi-billion-dollar investment. Brooks Range, they're a small oil company down there in on the west side of the Kapark River unit. We're anticipating those guys will probably come into production hopefully in the first quarter or first half of next year. So if you add all of this up, you come up with about $13 billion in capital and hundreds of thousands of barrels of new production that's slated to come online over the next 7 years. Just about every project I've talked about says, they'll be on stream before 2025. Now, of course, you have to give schedules a little bit slip, so maybe it's 7 to 10 years. But there is an awful lot of activity being planned down the North Slope. And that ties in pretty well to what APICC is trying to do. APICC is trying to provide the workers for what's coming down the road for the new opportunities that we see in Alaska. For this work, we're going to need, the trades, we're going to need welders, we're going to need operators, we're going to need truck drivers. In fact, there is a shortage of CDL guys on the North Slope right now. We're also going to need operators. Besides operators for these new fields that I've talked about, our workforce is still getting older and people are still going to be retiring. So it's not only the new projects, but it's also just trying to replenish the workforce that we have up there. So with all that said, what could go wrong, right? What could change these plans? Well, there's one that I'm pretty sure everybody in this room is pretty familiar with because I saw the booth outside. And that's the fish ballot initiative, the fish habitat initiative. I'm sure everybody in here is pretty well aware of what that means for resource development. When we look at it, and I've read this thing pretty closely, the actual legislation that they're proposing through the initiative, it's a shotgun approach, looking for, it's a problem, looking for a solution, looking for a problem. It's going to be, if it passes, it would impact just about every aspect of Alaskan life. Not just resource development on the North Slope, but the average Alaskan who happens to have a cabin on a stream or a lake that has anadromous fish. Doesn't have to just be salmon. It could be sheefish. It could be Arctic cisco. It could be anything that migrates out of salt water into fresh water. We're concerned about it. We take a look at this, and if it passes, it would certainly provide an avenue for outside parties to come in and either slow things down or in some instances stop our development. It creates new avenues for litigation. Right now, fish habitat permits aren't litigatable. There's all kinds of other things people can challenge us on courts right now, but the fish permit isn't one of them. Some might think that's a good thing, but when you look at this particular legislation, what it does is it puts scientific requirements in statute. And I didn't count them up, but it's something like 20 or different criteria. Now that they're in statute, the biologist doesn't have the opportunity to go back and determine what's important and what's not. If he doesn't check every one of those boxes, and I'm a lawyer for an ENGO, or I'm your neighbor down the street and I don't like what you're doing in your backyard, I can take you to court. That's a whole different game. And if you don't get the permit, it's a criminal offense. And that includes minor permits as well. So I don't want to belabor this too much, but I do hope that Alaskans do take the time to get educated on this and vote no on this issue. So that brings me to my last slide. Elections do matter. We have an election coming up next Tuesday, and it's going to be important on a lot of fronts. Certainly the salmon habitat initiative or fish habitat initiative is going to be critical, but also just getting legislators and representatives who are interested in keeping a positive business environment in Alaska. As I mentioned at the beginning, one of the things that changed and made it possible for a company like mine to come back into the state and develop these plans that I've just shared with you is having a tax framework that's competitive and keeps our overall cost structure such that we can compete with other opportunities in our portfolio. That's that's discussed every year in the legislature. I've been doing this for a while, and every year somebody wants to propose an increase in taxes. Well, we're still 80 to 90% of the UGF, even when prices are low, and anything that's done to increase our tax burden increases our costs and causes us to be less competitive. So it's important for me, and hopefully for Alaskans in general, to have a legislature that has a positive outlook when it comes to business investment in the state. Well, I appreciate you all listening to me this afternoon. That concludes what I had to say, but I will be more than willing to take any questions. So thank you.
I'm curious what you could say about how these opportunities will open up new opportunities for startup businesses, innovation, and other entrepreneurial opportunities for Alaskans.
One of the things that we're always looking at doing is trying to figure out better ways to be more efficient and cost efficient in everything that we do. So ideas that come that either improve drilling efficiency or improve our construction efficiency, all those things are obviously going to be things that we're going to be interested in. Everything that we do goes out for bid, so if somebody's got an innovative idea that's going to reduce costs, hopefully that gives them that advantage that they need to get whatever kind of contract they're bidding on. At any rate, I do believe that it's going to put a lot of pressure throughout Alaska if we get all these things coming on stream the time I talked about. So obviously we're going to have to, we need a bigger workforce. We're going to need to drive things to do them better, faster, quicker.
As the picture that you gave us goes forward and those increases and what we see in the line, TAPS, if you will, increases, what are some of the activities right now going on in TAPS to make sure that as we see the increase from the slope, that the integrity and capability of moving that gets to where it needs to go?
So I am on the owners committee for TAPS, so I'm pretty familiar with what's going on over there at APICC. They have a world-class maintenance program over there. They run pigs down the line on a periodic basis. They're constantly monitoring the line for corrosion. They keep, all the pumps and everything else that we need. They've studied it to make sure we have the proper amount of heat additions so we can keep the pipeline running at lower rates as well as higher rates. We've looked pretty hard at the pipeline in terms of what its capacities are, what its capabilities are in its current configuration, and we can handle any of the increased production that I've talked about in this without making any major investments. So I feel pretty comfortable about where APICC is right now.
It was interesting, when I was reading the newspaper this morning, there was an article in this morning's paper that talked about the ability of Alaska to provide workforce in order to man projects coming down the road. What's ConocoPhillips feeling as far as the ability of the Alaska education system's workforce development to do that?
Well, I think the infrastructure is in place to train the people that industry is going to need over the next, 10 years or so. We have Illisovic College, we have the Pipeline Training Center in Fairbanks, we have APICC, we have the programs that go on through the university system. So I think the infrastructure is there. The biggest question is, can you get students interested? Can you get Alaskans interested to go get the training? And then realistically, the biggest issue we've always had is timing the training to the job opportunities, because it doesn't always jibe. It's not like Texas where you have this huge consumption of labor and crafts. So that'll be a challenge also, is to make sure that if we overtrain, people find jobs, they can come back when the work appears here at Alaska, because we are a little bit peaky when it comes to our labor force. But I think the infrastructure is in place, and of course as a company we're certainly interested in working with the educators and the trainers to make sure that we do what we can to get people trained up, and Alaskans in particular trained up to execute this work.
Hi. Whoa. I work with young people in ASD, and what you shared really provides a hope for their future, for the state that they love. What would you say, in a few words, if a young person is looking for the future and jobs, what is it that you would think that would prepare them the most in their mindset right now?
Well, a couple things. I'd say, if you're interested in the engineering side and the technical side of things, you need to bear down on your math and science. You need to do well in school. You need to be competitive with the grades that you get. And you don't have to be an engineer. You can also go the trade route as well. But if you do, you've got to have a strong work ethic. No matter what you do, you have to have a strong work ethic. And I know everybody in this room knows that, but it's not always apparent to young kids. I've got one myself, and it's taken a while for him to get that idea. And quite frankly, you got to stay away from things like marijuana. We have legalized marijuana in this state, and it's still against our policies to hire people that can't pass that drug test. So I think most of our young people probably can, but there are some things that have happened legally that might make that more challenging. So we need to emphasize the fact that you still have to stay away from some of these things. And you do those things, I think you're going to have a pretty good shot at getting a high-paying job.